Welcome to the Then and Now show, Then and Now, Rephotographing Missoula. This is a project of the Historic Preservation Office, funded by the Missoula International Airport, the Montana Committee for the Humanities, the Office of Planning and Grants. And it got started in an almost serendipitous way. When I became the Historic Preservation Officer, I wrote this project in my work plan with no money and no idea how I was going to get it funded. And about 2 years ago, Jody Allison Bunnell contacted me and said, you know, I'd really like to do a rephotography project. And I said, well, funny you should think about that. So we put our heads together, put a grant application together to the Committee for Humanities. They funded it at about $3,000, and that was the genesis of putting this whole thing together. Originally, we were going to have one traveling exhibition of these 16 comparison images. And as we progressed in our thinking, and with the assistance of the airport, in terms of funding it, we're now able to have this permanent installation at the airport and a traveling exhibition that would be available to other museums in other parts of Montana or in other places around Missoula. So that's the beginning. The images range from the late 1800s, from about 1890 to 1945. And one of the interesting sort of pieces of the puzzle is the panoramic comparisons, which include a 1910 panorama from Waterworks Hill and a 2006 panorama taken by Will Landon.
I've lived in Missoula for 10 years. For 5 of those years, I was the archivist at the University of Montana, working with that very large photograph collection, and always wanted to do this project. Now that I don't work there anymore, I had time to write the grant and help make it happen. And this is what's nice about this project is 2 things came together: is my desire and interest in doing it, and the Historic Preservation Commission had for a long time had this on its work plan. Really wanted to do it, but kind of needed someone to appear and write the grant and get a project going. So our 2 desires came together, and that's what's made it happen. Thanks to funding from the Montana Committee for the Humanities and Missoula County Airport and some other funders, we've finally been able to make this happen. The panoramic is a really important image. That was actually retaken with a vintage circuit camera, which rolls the film past and takes a, in this case, 180-degree view. Circuit images have these long, narrow negatives because it rolls the film past an aperture. And we were fortunate to find Will Landon of Bellevue, Washington. Found that through a Panoramic Photographers Professional Association. And he was willing to travel over here, which he did last mid-October, retake that image. He has a lot of experience doing repeat images where he's really finding the spot where that image was taken from. And he figures he was within about 10 feet where the original was taken from. Those circuit cameras and those panoramic images were very popular starting the turn of the century, and really until motion pictures displaced them. They weren't so popular after that, but he actually had all the different sizes of cameras, so that was wonderful. And to be able to display those with one over the other, you can look across the landscape at that point and really see things that line up: the courthouse, the railroad roundhouse, the water storage tank up on Waterworks Hill. Very easy to see. And one of the things that's very striking to me there is how bare the South Hills are and how very covered up with housing they are now.
All of the photographs were done, all the contemporary ones were done by Missoula photographers, Chris Audio, Marcy James, and Christy Hager, and Will Landon, who is from Bellingham, Washington. And Will's camera was as old as he is. He's 77. The other photographers aren't that old.
I was approached about a year and a half ago by my art professor, Raphael Chacon, who knows I'm a lover of abandoned buildings, because that's what I love to photograph a lot. And he invited me to apply for this. He knew about this project then and now that was going on, and thought it would be a perfect project for me to apply for. And so I did. along with Chris Audio and Christy Hager and I think several others. And so Chris and Christy and I got together with Philip and Jody and Mark and chose amongst a lot of photos, I believe, I don't know, there were hundreds of photos to choose from. And initially we had them all pinned up on the wall, and we would kind of point at the ones that we responded to and wanted to photograph, and we narrowed it down to a certain area. And I guess I'll say that what prompted me to choose the photos I did is that I'm a lover of scaling tall buildings. And luckily, Christy is not. And so she gave me her tall buildings, and I gave her my beautiful homes to photograph. And I had a great time climbing up very narrow, thin, sketchy ladders.
I was given a choice of what photographs to take, and I chose some hillside shots from Mount Sentinel, one from Bonner, and one from the water tower. The three photographers had to print their own work using 4x5 cameras. This one photograph taken of the Rattlesnake Valley was shot what I thought was from a rock up atop Mount Sentinel, 100 yards north of the M. And I got all my equipment up there on top of this rock, and I realized that no, it was really about another 50 yards north of that. So I climbed down with all my equipment and rephotographed through some trees of the Rattlesnake Valley. It's very, very near the same because the camera lenses were a little bit different as far as wide angle or telephoto. So they approximate the size and image of the original photographs.
The two buildings that I climbed to photograph from the top of the buildings had very narrow ladders that you had to climb to get up on the top. So I climbed them with very heavy, burdensome equipment, much like Chris had to do scaling mountainsides. While he was scaling mountainsides, I climbed these buildings with his antiquated 4x5 equipment and took photographs of the buildings, but I spent a lot of time running across the top of the building as well because I was very excited being on top of the building. 'Cause what other time do you have an excuse to be able to be on top of buildings in Missoula? So that was great.
I would like to do this kind of project again if it related to, say, erosion of the landscape or change of the landscape in any way.
Chris is multifaceted because he's both a traditional landscape photographer as well as an architectural photographer. So that's why when you look at his work, you'll probably see quite a difference. You'll see big, beautiful, expansive landscapes as well as urban architecture. For me, I'm very drawn to urban environments and how they change. So I was drawn to seeing historical sites transformed from being, like there's an image over on the other side of the room of teepees in a field. And initially I had wanted to photograph, that same field is where the football team practices. I think it's the high school football team practices there in the fall. And initially I thought, well, that will make a really bold statement going from the teepees in the field to the football players in the field. And then I thought, well, I don't think I want to put that much of an imprint of my political bias or whatnot on that place. And so instead I chose to photograph a more quiet, relaxing scene of, it happened to be, I chose a day where there was somebody jogging and somebody else came into the frame while I was shooting and they were playing with their dog. So I think that was a little more complementary to the original photograph rather than being controversial. I think that I would say what intrigued me the most was trying to get a photograph. It was of the mountains, and the trouble was that the river had been rerouted at some point, and so I spent a long time walking up and down the river trying to locate the site, and eventually Christy wound up finding it for me, and she photographed it, thankfully. Who you put in the photo, like for example, this photo behind me, you wait because there's a lot of foot traffic right on that corner. It's a very, it's a heavily traffic corner with all kinds of, people walking downtown. And so deciding whether you're going to choose a bicyclist going across the footpath or whether you choose the couple that has the baby in the stroller, that's a whole other statement that you have to say. The types of cars that are driving over the bridge at the time that you take the picture has a lot to say. I was excited over on the other side of the room that there's the Higgins Street, I have a motorcyclist in the picture, and that, for whatever reason, I thought that was exciting because it was going from horse and buggy to bicycle to motorcycle. But I did consider who was occupying the frame, what kind of activity was going on next to those stationary buildings.
As we look at these images, we can see change as progress, we can see change as desecration, we can see it somewhere in between. But what's important about a project like this is that we see the change, that we understand where we've come from, where our built and natural landscape has come from, what decisions we made along the way to shape that. And then that in turn can allow us to be thoughtful about what decisions we make today that are going to shape our built and natural landscape of tomorrow. And that's a big part of what we hope to accomplish with this exhibit.
So there's a story attached to each one of these images, and you can read it in the captions. Come out to the airport and have a look. When we spoke to the airport said this could be out here as a permanent exhibition, and so we see this as being here for probably the next 5 years. Some of the images won't seem dated because they're the historic vintage images, but the new ones might seem old after a few years, and so it might be time to rephotograph Missoula again.